My husband gave away the most expensive gift I'd ever received to his gambling addicted mother. And what I discovered next destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My name is Serafina, and I'm about to tell you a story that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. People see me now and assume I've always had it together. But just 6 months ago, I was standing in the rain outside Marcello's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, soaking wet and humiliated while my entire social circle watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I'm the heiress to Sterling Tech, yeah, but I've never been the type to just coast on my family name. I work as director of operations, putting in 60-hour weeks because I actually care about what my grandfather built. My 30th birthday was supposed to be this huge celebration of everything I'd accomplished. My father had been mysterious for weeks, dropping hints about a gift that would change my perspective on success. When he handed me those keys in front of everyone at the party, I actually cried. A Porsche Panamera, custom built, midnight blue with cream leather interior. It wasn't just a car, it was my father saying he saw how hard I worked, how much I'd proven myself beyond just being his daughter. That was 3 weeks before the rain-soaked night that split my life into before and after. I'd spent that evening at an emergency board meeting that ran late. When I finally got outside, my car was gone from the executive parking spot. I called Dominic, my husband of 3 years, figuring maybe he'd borrowed it for something. He didn't answer. I ended up taking an Uber to the restaurant where we were meeting clients, my dress getting drenched in the downpour because I had to park 2 blocks away. When I walked in, dripping water onto the marble floor, I saw him. Dominic was holding court at our table, laughing with the Hendersons and the Chens, our biggest investors. He saw me, and his smile got wider, sharper. That's when I knew something was very wrong. This story is longer than I ever wanted it to be, and darker than I could have imagined. If you want to hear how a single act of disrespect unraveled into something that would end with police cars and my mother-in-law screaming in handcuffs, stay with me through this. You can follow along here to make sure you don't miss what happened next, because trust me, this was just the beginning. I stood there in the entrance of Marcello's, mascara probably running down my face, my Valentino dress clinging to me in all the wrong ways. Every head in that restaurant turned to look at me. These were people I'd known for years, colleagues and friends, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. Serafina Sterling doesn't show up to business dinners looking like she just crawled out of a swimming pool. Dominic stood up slowly, and I swear I saw amusement flicker across his face before he arranged it into concern. He walked over to me, and I noticed how expensive his suit looked, how perfectly his hair was styled. He'd had time to prepare. He'd known I'd be showing up like this. The question burst out of me before I could stop it. "Where's my car?" He laughed. Actually laughed, loud enough for our entire table to hear. "Oh, babe, I lent it to my mom. She had this big charity bingo tournament tonight and wanted to make an entrance. You know how she is." He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, like I was being ridiculous for even asking. I felt my father stiffen next to me. Richard Sterling doesn't do public scenes, but I saw his jaw clench, saw the way his fingers tightened around his whiskey glass. Dominic noticed it too, and that's when he really went for the kill. "Come on, Sarah, don't be selfish. You've got money for Ubers, right? My mom doesn't have the same resources you do. It's just a car. Besides, it technically belongs to the family now, doesn't it?" He said it with this condescending smile, like he was teaching me a lesson about generosity. Something about the way he said, "belongs to the family," made my stomach drop. But I was too humiliated to process it right then. Mrs. Henderson was looking at me with this mixture of pity and judgment. Mr. Chen had gone back to his phone, clearly uncomfortable. I wanted to disappear. My father stood up, adjusted his tie with deliberate precision, and pulled out his phone. His thumbs moved across the screen for maybe 10 seconds. Then he slipped it back into his pocket and looked at Dominic with an expression I'd never seen before. It was cold, calculating. It was the face of a man who'd built a tech empire from nothing and crushed every competitor who underestimated him. "Dominic," my father said quietly, "you've made an interesting choice tonight." Dominic's smile faltered for just a second, but then he recovered, putting his arm around my wet shoulders like he was the supportive husband. "Richard, I'm just trying to teach Sarah about family values. You understand, right? Patricia raised me to believe in sharing with those we love. I excused myself to the bathroom, unable to stand there another second. In the mirror, I looked like a mess, but it was the expression in my own eyes that shocked me. I looked small, defeated, like a child being scolded for not wanting to share her toys. When had I become this person? When had I started accepting being treated like my feelings didn't matter? I cleaned myself up as best I could and returned to the table. The dinner was excruciating. Dominic held my hand across the table, playing the devoted husband while he made small comments all night about how I needed to be less attached to material things and more family-oriented. Every word was a tiny cut, delivered with a smile. It was only later, after I'd gone to bed and Dominic was still downstairs on his laptop, that I found the notification on my phone. A traffic violation alert. My car had been caught by a speed camera running a red light at 11:47 p.m. the previous Tuesday. The location was in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood 40 minutes outside the city. Not anywhere near the country club where Patricia supposedly played bingo, not anywhere near her house in the suburbs. Why would Patricia be in Riverside at midnight? I lay in the dark next to my sleeping husband and felt the first real crack in my world, because suddenly, nothing about this situation made sense. And when I thought back over the past few months, I realized there had been other small things. Dominic working late more often, his phone face down on tables. Patricia suddenly having new jewelry, new clothes, always with some explanation about a lucky night at the casino. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, I'd made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what my husband had done with my car, and why. Something told me the answer was going to change everything. I spent the next morning at work unable to concentrate on anything except the growing knot in my stomach. During my lunch break, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into our joint credit card account and downloaded every statement from the past 6 months. What I found made my blood run cold. There were charges I didn't recognize. Hundreds of them. Victoria's Secret purchases in sizes I didn't wear. Dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never been to, always for 2 people. Always on nights when Dominic claimed he was working late. Hotel rooms. Flower deliveries to an address I didn't know. And strangest of all, monthly transfers to something called Riverside Properties LLC. I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unravel. This couldn't be my marriage. Dominic and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3. We'd met at a tech conference where he'd been presenting on digital marketing strategies. He'd been charming, ambitious, supportive of my career in a way that felt rare. My father had reservations at first, said there was something too smooth about Dominic, but I'd been so in love. Now I was looking at evidence of what? An affair? Financial fraud? Both. I called the number on my car's GPS tracking system. Yes, I had tracking on a vehicle that expensive. The customer service representative pulled up my account and gave me the location history I requested. My Porsche had been making regular trips to the same address in Riverside for the past month. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. I wrote down the address, 847 Riverside Commons, apartment 3B. That afternoon, I left work early, telling my assistant I had a migraine. I drove my backup car, a modest Honda Civic that I kept for errands, to Riverside. The neighborhood was tired-looking, all aging apartment complexes and strip malls with half-empty parking lots. Nothing about it screamed Patricia Sterling's usual haunts. I found 847 Riverside Commons. It was a 3-story building with peeling paint and a broken security gate. And there, parked in spot 3B like it owned the place, was my midnight blue Porsche Panamera. My hands were shaking so hard, I could barely hold my phone to take pictures. But I did. I photographed everything. The car, the license plate, the apartment building, the mailbox for 3B, which had 2 names on it. C. Morrison and Guest. I sat in my Honda for 2 hours, waiting. At 6:47 p.m., a woman came out of the building. She was young, maybe 25, with long auburn hair and the kind of effortlessly perfect casual style that costs a fortune to achieve. She was wearing Lululemon leggings and a cropped hoodie, carrying a yoga mat. And she walked straight to my Porsche, pulled out keys from her designer purse, and drove away. I followed her. She went to a SoulCycle class in the upscale part of downtown. the one where memberships cost $300 a month. After her class, she met friends for dinner at Catch, an Instagram-famous seafood restaurant where appetizers start at $40. She paid with a credit card, laughing with her friends, completely carefree. When she finally drove back to Riverside at 10:15 p.m., I was right behind her. She parked my car, went inside, and lights came on in apartment 3B. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car outside that building until 1:37 a.m. when another car pulled up. A black Mercedes I recognized immediately because I'd helped make the payments on it. Dominic got out, looked around quickly, and used his own key to enter the building. Through the third-floor window of apartment 3B, I watched silhouettes move together. I watched my husband kiss another woman in the window of an apartment paid for with my money, in a car my father had given me, and I felt something inside me die and something else, something harder and colder, be born in its place. I drove to my father's house. It was almost 3 a.m. when I knocked on his door, and he answered in his robe, took one look at my face, and said, "Tell me everything." By the time the sun came up, we had a plan, and it was going to destroy Dominic completely. I went home that morning at 6 a.m., right before Dominic would wake up. I climbed into bed, set my alarm for 7:30, and pretended to sleep. When he stirred next to me, I felt every muscle in my body tense, but I forced myself to relax, to be normal. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing my forehead like he hadn't spent half the night with his mistress. "Morning," I managed, keeping my voice sleepy and soft. The next 2 weeks were the hardest performance of my life. My father had been clear. We needed evidence, legal documentation, time to prepare. I couldn't let Dominic know I suspected anything, so I became the perfect wife. I smiled at his jokes. I asked about his day. When he said he had late client meetings, I said I understood. When Patricia called, demanding I bring over designer handbags I wasn't using because they're just sitting in your closet gathering dust, I brought them to her with a smile. But while I was playing the devoted wife, my father was working behind the scenes. He hired forensic accountants to trace every dollar Dominic had spent. He hired private investigators to document everything, every meeting with the mistress, every lie, every manipulation. He contacted our corporate lawyers to review Dominic's employment contract and position at Sterling Tech. And I did my own investigation. I discovered that C. Morrison was Chloe Morrison, Dominic's ex-girlfriend from college, the one he'd told me he'd broken up with years before we met. Except they'd never really broken up. According to her Instagram, which I accessed through a fake account, they'd been together the entire time. She posted photos of her man from behind, careful never to show his face, but I recognized his watch, his build, his clothes. There were pictures from vacations I thought he'd taken for work, restaurants he'd claimed were business dinners. Our entire relationship was a lie. The forensic accountants found even more. Dominic hadn't just been spending my money on Chloe. He'd been embezzling from Sterling Tech for 18 months, creating fake vendor accounts and funneling company funds into offshore accounts. He'd stolen over $740 $1 from my family's company. And Patricia? She wasn't an innocent pawn. She was his accomplice. My private investigator discovered she'd forged my signature on the car's title transfer documents, changing the registration to her name so she could use it as collateral for loans from loan sharks. She owed $130 as $100 to various gambling establishments and illegal lenders. The Porsche was supposed to be her insurance policy. That's why Dominic had been so casual about lending it to her, because in his mind, it was already theirs. He'd planned the whole thing. But there was something else the investigators found, something that made my blood run even colder. Dominic had met with a divorce attorney 3 weeks ago. He'd been planning to file papers the day after my father was supposed to announce his promotion to CEO. The strategy was clear: establish himself as a successful executive at Sterling Tech, paint me as an unstable heiress who couldn't handle his success, and then take me for half of everything in the divorce. He'd been planning to destroy me and take my money, and I'd been sleeping next to him every night, completely oblivious. One night during this period, we were having dinner at home when he mentioned the upcoming board meeting. My father had called it suddenly, saying he had a major announcement about the company's leadership structure. "I think this is it," Dominic said, his eyes bright with excitement he couldn't quite hide. "I think Richard's finally going to name me CEO. All these years of proving myself are about to pay off." I looked at him across our dining table, at this man I'd thought I loved, and I saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't excited about the responsibility or the chance to build something meaningful. He was excited about the power, the money, the status. He'd never loved me. He'd loved what I could give him. "That would be amazing," I said, putting my hand over his. "You've worked so hard. You deserve this." His smile was triumphant. "We deserve this, babe. This is going to change everything for us." He had no idea how right he was. The next day, my father pulled me into his office at Sterling Tech. "Everything's in place," he said. "The board meeting is set for Friday night at 7 p.m. I've arranged it as a celebration dinner at headquarters. Everyone will be there. Board members, department heads, major investors. Patricia is invited too." I felt sick. "Are you sure about this? Going this public?" My father's expression was granite. "Serafina, this man stole from our family, from our company, and from you personally. He humiliated you in front of our colleagues and friends. He planned to destroy your reputation and take half your inheritance. Yes, I'm sure. When someone shows you who they really are, you make sure everyone else sees it too." Friday arrived. I got dressed carefully that morning, choosing a red power suit that my mother had worn to her first board meeting decades ago. Dominic noticed and smiled approvingly. "You look incredible," he said. "Perfect for tonight. Everyone's going to see us as the power couple we are." "Absolutely," I agreed, and felt nothing but cold anticipation. The Sterling Tech headquarters building gleamed in the Friday evening light, all glass and steel and power. Dominic pulled into the executive parking garage in his Mercedes, and I noticed how he checked his reflection 3 times in the rearview mirror, adjusting his tie, smoothing his hair. This was his moment, or so he believed. "Ready to celebrate?" he asked, squeezing my hand. "More than you know," I said, and meant every word. The main conference hall had been transformed. My father's assistant had outdone herself. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, catered food from the city's most exclusive restaurant. A stage at the front with a podium and a massive screen behind it. Every important person in our industry was there, mingling with drinks in hand. The Hendersons, the Chens, our board members, department heads, even some journalists from the tech and business sections of major publications. And there, making her entrance in my midnight blue Porsche, pulling right up to the main entrance where everyone could see through the glass walls, was Patricia Sterling. She'd dressed up for the occasion, wearing too much jewelry and a dress that was trying too hard to be elegant. She emerged from my car like she owned it, tossing the keys to the valet with a flourish, and I watched several people's expressions shift to confusion. They knew that car was mine. My father had made a point of it at my birthday party. Dominic saw her and his smile tightened just slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Mom wanted to make an entrance," he said to me under his breath. "Hope you don't mind." "Of course not," I lied smoothly. "It's a celebration." Patricia swept into the building and made a beeline for us, air kissing my cheeks while reeking of expensive perfume I'd never seen her wear before. "Darling Serafina, you look lovely, though that suit is a bit severe, don't you think? You should wear softer colors. Men prefer softer women." I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind, Patricia." My father took the stage at exactly 7:30 p.m. The room fell silent. Richard Sterling commanded respect without even trying, and when he spoke, people listened. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "We're here to discuss Sterling Tech's future leadership, a decision that will shape this company for the next generation." He paused, and I saw Dominic straighten his shoulders, preparing himself for his moment. But before we get to that, I want to talk about something else. Something that has nothing to do with business acumen or strategic vision, and everything to do with character. Dominic's smile faltered. Just for a second, but I saw it. 3 weeks ago, my father continued, someone in this room demonstrated that they don't understand what this company stands for. We're built on integrity, on respect, on treating people with dignity. So before we move forward, I think it's important we all watch something together. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and clicked it. The massive screen behind him came to life. The first image was security footage from our corporate parking garage. Timestamp 3 months ago. Dominic walking to his car, but stopping at my parking space where my Porsche sat. The video showed him looking around carefully, then using a key to enter my car. He emerged with my registration papers and vehicle title. The next video was from a copy shop. Dominic at a machine, scanning documents, comparing my signature on my driver's license to something he was creating, practicing my signature over and over on a legal pad, then carefully forging it onto new title transfer documents. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel people staring at Dominic, whose face had drained of all color. But my father wasn't done. The next footage showed Dominic meeting with Patricia at a DMV office, handing her the forged documents. Then Patricia at a loan shark's office, using my car's title to secure a massive loan. Now, some of you might be thinking this is just a family matter, my father said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. But it's not, because Dominic Sterling didn't stop at stealing from my daughter. The screen changed again. Financial records, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, every single embezzlement transaction Dominic had made from Sterling Tech laid out in excruciating detail. Fake vendor accounts, offshore transfers. The forensic accountants had found everything. Dominic stood frozen next to me, and I could feel him trembling. "Richard," he started, his voice strangled. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain. You can explain to the police," my father said calmly. "They're waiting outside to speak with you about fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft." That's when Patricia started screaming. She'd been standing near the entrance, and she realized what was happening faster than Dominic did. She turned and ran for the door, but my father clicked his remote again. Outside, visible through the glass walls, my Porsche's lights started flashing. The horn blared in a pattern that screamed, "Stolen vehicle! Stolen vehicle! Stolen vehicle!" The car doors locked automatically, and Patricia, who'd been trying to jump in and drive away, was trapped outside, battering at the windows while the alarm shrieked. Police cars pulled up with lights flashing. Officers entered the building through the main entrance, walking past Patricia, who'd collapsed against my car, wailing. They came straight to Dominic. "Dominic Sterling," one officer said, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." I watched them handcuff my husband in front of everyone we knew. His face was gray, his eyes darting around the room looking for help that wasn't coming. When his gaze landed on me, I saw the moment he realized I'd known, that I'd played him just as well as he'd played me. "Sarah," he gasped, "please, I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. I love you." I stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear me. "No, Dominic. You loved my money. You loved my family's power. You never loved me at all. And now everyone knows it." They led him away. Through the glass walls, I watched other officers taking Patricia into custody, dragging her away from my car while she screamed about how this was all a mistake, how she was a victim, how her son would fix everything. My father's hand landed on my shoulder. The room was still silent, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father said into that silence, his voice carrying clearly. "Now, about that leadership announcement, I'd like to introduce you to Sterling Tech's new CEO, my daughter, Serafina Sterling." The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. But I barely heard it. I was watching through the glass as police cars drove away, taking my old life with them. The next 72 hours were a media circus. By Saturday morning, every business publication and local news outlet had the story. Tech heiress's husband arrested in $740K embezzlement scheme. Sterling Tech executive and mother charged with grand theft auto and fraud. The headlines were everywhere. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends I hadn't heard from in years calling to offer support, or more likely, to get the inside scoop. Reporters camped outside my house, outside Sterling Tech headquarters, trying to get a statement. I ignored all of it. What I couldn't ignore was the investigation that kept uncovering more rot. The forensic accountants my father had hired kept digging, and they found layers of deception I hadn't imagined. Dominic had been running his scheme for almost 2 years, since 3 months after we got married. The fake vendor accounts he'd created were sophisticated. He'd used AI-generated company names, registered them in Delaware, created entire fake business histories. He'd been siphoning money steadily, carefully, in amounts small enough that they didn't trigger automatic fraud alerts, but large enough that over time, they added up to $750,000. And Chloe Morrison? She wasn't just his mistress, she was his business partner. The apartment in Riverside was in her name, but Dominic had been paying for it since day one. They'd been planning this together since before he even met me. The private investigator found evidence that Dominic had specifically targeted me at that tech conference 5 years ago. He'd researched my family, knew I was the heir to Sterling Tech, and engineered our chance meeting. Every moment of our relationship had been calculated. Every "I love you" had been a lie designed to get him closer to my family's money and power. The divorce attorney Dominic had met with 3 weeks ago, that investigation revealed his full plan. He was going to file for divorce the week after he became CEO, claiming I was mentally unstable and that my father had exhibited nepotism by giving me positions I wasn't qualified for. He had documentation prepared, carefully edited videos of me having breakdowns that were actually just me being emotional after long days at work, statements from Patricia about my erratic behavior, even a fake journal supposedly written by me that made me sound unhinged. He was going to paint himself as the long-suffering husband of a spoiled, unstable heiress, position himself as the real brains behind Sterling Tech's recent success, and then take me for half of everything in the divorce. My inheritance, my shares in the company, everything. And because California is a community property state, he might have actually succeeded if we hadn't caught him first. The betrayal went so deep I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night in my childhood bedroom at my father's house, unable to go back to the home I'd shared with Dominic, replaying every moment of our relationship and seeing the manipulation in everything. The way he'd love-bombed me in the beginning, making me feel like I'd finally found someone who understood me. How he'd gradually isolated me from friends, always having reasons why my college roommate was toxic, or my work friends were using me for connections. The way he'd made me doubt my own judgment, my own worth, until I was so focused on being good enough for him that I didn't notice he was robbing me blind. Patricia, it turned out, was more than just an enabler. She'd been actively coaching Dominic on how to manipulate me. The investigators found text messages between them, strategies for how to make me feel guilty, how to play on my desire to be accepted by his family, how to position every request as a test of whether I was really committed to the marriage. She'd helped him research my psychological weak spots and exploit them. The gambling addiction was real, but she'd also been taking money directly from Dominic's embezzlement accounts. The loan sharks she owed money to, they'd started making threats, which is why Dominic had accelerated his timeline. He'd needed to secure his position as CEO and file for divorce quickly before Patricia's debts came due and caused the whole house of cards to collapse. My father found all of this out through his investigators and lawyers, and every new revelation made him more coldly furious. But what pushed him over the edge was the discovery that Dominic had tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. 3 weeks before my father caught him, Dominic had secretly consulted with a psychiatrist, claiming his wife was having delusions and breakdowns. He'd tried to start a paper trail that would support having me involuntarily committed, or at least declared unable to manage my own affairs. That way, he could take control of my assets even without a divorce. When my father showed me that documentation, I threw up. The man I'd slept next to, cooked dinner for, shared my dreams and fears with, had been actively trying to have me institutionalized so he could steal my money more easily. But here's what Dominic and Patricia didn't know. My father had suspected something was off for months. He'd started his own quiet investigation long before I came to him that night. He'd been gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, preparing. When I showed up at his door at 3 a.m., he already had 60% of the case built. I'd just confirmed his worst suspicions. The Friday night confrontation hadn't been improvised. It had been meticulously planned. My father had timed it specifically for after Patricia had picked up her latest loan from the loan sharks, so she'd be in violation of multiple laws simultaneously. He'd coordinated with the district attorney's office, who'd been eager to prosecute such a high-profile fraud case. He'd even arranged for the specific police officers who'd handled previous white-collar crime cases to be the ones to make the arrest, so there'd be no question of improper procedure. And the car? My father had remote access to its systems installed the day after I told him Dominic had lent it to Patricia. He'd been tracking every trip, recording every use of my vehicle in the commission of their crimes. When he locked Patricia inside that night, it wasn't just dramatic. It was calculated to keep her at the scene until police arrived, preventing her from fleeing or disposing of evidence. Everything had been a trap, and Dominic and Patricia had walked right into it. By Tuesday, more details started emerging. Chloe Morrison was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for immunity. She'd been keeping her own records, scared that Dominic would eventually throw her under the bus. She provided emails, text messages, even recordings of Dominic discussing his plans to bleed Sterling Tech dry and make that spoiled princess pay for being born rich. The prosecutors told me I'd need to testify at the trial, that I'd have to recount the whole relationship, the manipulation, the humiliation, that Dominic's defense attorney would try to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife making things up. I'd have to be cross-examined, challenged, picked apart in front of a courtroom. I'll do it, I told them. Whatever it takes. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. The investigation had uncovered that Dominic had done this before, to other women. Chloe wasn't his first partner in crime. She was just the current one. There were at least 2 other women in his past who'd been targeted, manipulated, and financially abused. They'd been too ashamed to report it, had settled quietly, and moved away. I wasn't going to let him do this to anyone else, ever again. The trial took place 4 months after Dominic's arrest. Those months had been a strange limbo period. I was running Sterling Tech as CEO, a position I'd earned, but that still felt heavy with the weight of how I'd gotten it. Every board meeting, every corporate decision, I could feel people watching me, wondering if I was up to the task or if I was just my father's daughter playing dress-up in the corner office. I made sure to prove them wrong. I worked 16-hour days, restructured our security protocols so what Dominic did could never happen again, and landed 3 major contracts that expanded our market share by 23%. I wasn't going to let anyone say I got the CEO position by default. But the trial was always looming. My lawyers prepared me for weeks. Mock cross-examinations where they played devil's advocate, asking me horrible questions about my marriage, my judgment, whether I'd really been so naive or if I was exaggerating for sympathy. They were getting me ready for what Dominic's defense team would try to do. Paint me as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, or as someone so privileged and out of touch that I couldn't tell the difference between a husband who loved me and one who was using me. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Monica Chen, sat me down 2 days before the trial started. Serafina, I need you to understand something. Dominic's lawyer is going to try to make you the villain of this story. He's going to suggest you're vindictive, that you're using your family's money and power to destroy an innocent man who just made some mistakes. He's going to say you gave permission for the car transfer, that you knew about the expenses. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared, I said, and I meant it. The courthouse on day 1 was packed. Media everywhere, cameras, reporters shouting questions as I walked up the steps. I wore a navy suit, my hair pulled back simply, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look professional, credible, strong. Inside the courtroom, I saw Dominic for the first time since his arrest. He'd lost weight, looked smaller somehow in his cheap suit. His assets had all been frozen, so he couldn't afford his usual expensive wardrobe. When his eyes met mine, I saw a flash of something. Anger, maybe, or calculation. He looked away first. Patricia was being tried separately, but I knew from my lawyers that she'd already tried to claim she was a victim of Dominic's manipulation, that she hadn't known the car was stolen, that the signature on the title transfer looked real to her. She was trying to throw her own son under the bus to save herself. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Financial records, surveillance footage, testimony from forensic accountants explaining exactly how Dominic had embezzled the money, character witnesses from Sterling Tech describing his behavior. And then, on day 3, they called me to the stand. I walked up, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Monica Chen led me through my testimony gently at first. How Dominic and I met, how he'd courted me, our marriage, when things started to seem off, the night of the restaurant humiliation. Can you describe how you felt when your husband gave away the car your father had given you? She asked. Small, I said, and my voice cracked just slightly. I felt small and stupid, like a child being told not to be selfish with her toys. But more than that, I felt confused, because the man I married had always said he supported me, that he was proud of my accomplishments. Giving away that car wasn't just about the vehicle, it was about showing me, in front of everyone who mattered in my professional life, that my achievements didn't mean anything, that I didn't deserve respect. Then Monica walked me through finding the traffic violation, tracking the car, discovering Chloe, following Dominic to the apartment. I kept my voice steady, factual, but I let the emotions show on my face. This wasn't an act. The pain was real. When it was time for cross-examination, Dominic's attorney, a slick man named Richard Pearson, approached with a condescending smile. "Ms. Sterling," he began, emphasizing my maiden name to remind everyone I was wealthy in my own right. "You've painted quite a picture of yourself as a victim. But isn't it true that you come from immense wealth and privilege? That you've never had to struggle for anything in your life?" "I've never had to struggle for money," I said calmly. "But I've worked for every professional achievement I have, and having wealth doesn't mean someone has the right to steal from me or manipulate me." He tried another angle. "You claim my client gave away your car, but isn't it true that in your marriage, you shared assets? That what was yours was his and vice versa?" "We shared some assets, yes. We had a joint checking account for household expenses, but my car was a personal gift from my father to me specifically. Dominic had his own car, and he didn't share mine with his mother. He forged my signature to transfer legal ownership and then used it as collateral for illegal loans. There's a significant difference. You hired investigators to follow my client. You didn't trust your own husband. Doesn't that suggest the problems in your marriage went both ways?" "I hired investigators after I discovered financial irregularities and evidence of infidelity. That's not a lack of trust. That's due diligence when you suspect a crime is being committed." He tried to rattle me for 2 hours, suggested I was emotionally unstable, implied I'd driven Dominic to cheat with my coldness, insinuated I was using my family's money to rig the justice system. But my lawyers had prepared me well, and I'd been running a tech company for months, fielding hostile questions from skeptical board members and aggressive competitors. Richard Pearson was amateur hour in comparison. The jury watched all of it. 12 people who would decide whether Dominic went to prison or walked free. I couldn't read their expressions, but I saw one woman in the back row, maybe in her 40s, nodding slightly when I described how Dominic had manipulated me. I focused on her, let myself believe that at least one person understood. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Chloe Morrison testified, admitting to everything in exchange for her immunity deal. She described how Dominic had approached her with the plan, how they'd calculated every step, how he'd laughed about how easy I was to manipulate because I was desperate to be loved for something other than my money. Hearing that gutted me, but I sat in the gallery with perfect posture, my face neutral, refusing to give Dominic the satisfaction of seeing me break. The defense tried to argue that Dominic had been planning to return all the money, that the affair with Chloe was separate from the embezzlement, that Patricia had acted on her own with the car. But the evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail was too clear, the premeditation too obvious. On the final day of testimony, the prosecution played one more video. It was Dominic talking to Chloe in the apartment, not knowing that my private investigator had placed a camera there during one of their absences. In the video, Dominic was laughing, drinking expensive whiskey paid for with stolen money. "The stupid bitch actually believes I love her," he said on the recording, his voice full of contempt. "She's so desperate for approval that she'll believe anything. Once I'm CEO, I'll have her declared incompetent, take control of everything, and she'll probably end up in some psychiatric facility somewhere. And I'll be running Sterling Tech with no one to answer to." The courtroom was silent as that video played. I watched the jury watch it. I saw their faces harden, saw disgust and anger replace any sympathy they might have had. Dominic put his head in his hands. Even his lawyer looked disgusted. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the 4 women stood and read the verdict. On the count of embezzlement in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Dominic's face went gray. Patricia, watching from the gallery, started crying loudly, causing a scene until the bailiff asked her to leave. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I wasn't required to attend, but I chose to be there anyway. I'd earned the right to see this through to the end. When the judge announced 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8 years, Dominic finally looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he understood that I'd won completely. Not just the case, but everything. I had my company, my reputation, my life. He had nothing but a prison cell and the knowledge that he'd destroyed himself through his own greed and arrogance. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked back at him steadily, letting him see that I was strong, that I'd survived him, that he'd failed to break me. Then I stood up and walked out of that courtroom without looking back. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting in my office at Sterling Tech when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Sterling, there's a letter here for you. It came through the prison mail system." My heart sank. I'd received 3 letters from Dominic since his sentencing, each one progressively more desperate. The first had been angry, threatening to appeal, claiming he'd been railroaded. The second had been manipulative, trying the old tactics, telling me he loved me, that we could work things out, that he'd changed. The third had been pathetic, begging for money for his commissary account, asking me to help with his appeal lawyers. I hadn't opened any of them past the first few lines. Each one went straight into a folder my lawyer kept, just in case. "Just add it to the file," I told her. "I don't need to see it." "Understood," she said, and I heard the approval in her voice. My whole team at Sterling Tech had rallied around me during the trial, and they respected that I wasn't letting Dominic have any more of my time or energy. I turned back to the proposal I was reviewing. We were launching a new cybersecurity division, something I'd been passionate about after everything that had happened. If Dominic could exploit our company's systems that easily, we needed to make sure it never happened again. I'd hired the best security team in the industry, and we were developing protocols that would become the new standard. My phone rang. It was my father. "Sarah, turn on CNBC." I grabbed my remote and switched on the TV mounted on my office wall. There was a business reporter standing outside Sterling Tech headquarters. "In a remarkable turnaround for Sterling Tech, the company has posted record profits this quarter under new CEO Serafina Sterling. At just 30 years old, Sterling has not only recovered from the embezzlement scandal that rocked the company earlier this year, but has expanded into new markets and increased the company's value by 34%. Industry analysts who initially questioned whether she was ready for the CEO position are now calling her one of the most innovative leaders in the tech sector." I felt a swell of pride, not just in the numbers, though those were satisfying, but in the fact that I'd proven, to myself more than anyone, that I was more than just Richard Sterling's daughter or Dominic's victim. I was a leader in my own right. That evening, I drove home in my midnight blue Porsche. I'd thought about selling it after everything, getting rid of the reminder. But then I decided that would be letting Dominic take one more thing from me. This car was a gift from my father, a symbol of his faith in me. I wasn't going to let Dominic's theft taint that. At home, I'd moved into a new penthouse downtown, needed a fresh start. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights. For the first time in almost a year, I felt at peace. My phone buzzed. A text from my college roommate, Maya, who I'd reconnected with after the trial. She'd been one of the friends Dominic had gradually pushed out of my life, and when I'd reached out to apologize for letting our friendship lapse, she'd immediately forgiven me and become one of my strongest supporters. "Dinner tomorrow? There's someone I want you to meet. My cousin just moved to the city and doesn't know anyone. No pressure, just friendly dinner with a group of people." I smiled and texted back, "Sounds perfect. But Maya, if this is a setup, I'm going to murder you. Not a setup, I promise. Just friends. You need more of those in your life anyway." She wasn't wrong. I'd spent so much of the past year in survival mode, then in rebuilding mode, that I hadn't really taken time to just be a person. To have friends, hobbies, a life outside of work and legal battles. Maybe it was time for that to change. Later that night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a business proposal or a legal brief, but actual creative writing. I'd loved writing fiction in college, before Sterling Tech and Dominic and adult responsibilities had taken over my life. I'd always told myself I'd get back to it someday. The story that came out was about a woman who discovers her husband is not who she thought he was. It was therapeutic, putting all that pain and betrayal onto the page, but reshaping it, giving it a different ending, exploring different possibilities. I wrote for 2 hours straight, lost in the flow of it. When I finally closed my laptop, I felt lighter. I'd spent so long being defined by what had happened to me, by Dominic's betrayal, by the trial, by becoming CEO in the aftermath of a scandal. But I was more than that. I was more than my worst experience. The next morning, I was in my office early when my father called. "Can you come down to the executive conference room? There's something I want to discuss." I found him there with our head of PR and our chief legal counsel. "What's going on?" I asked, suddenly nervous. Had something happened with Dominic's appeal? "Nothing bad," my father assured me. "In fact, something good. We've been approached by 3 different organizations who want you to speak about your experience: the National Domestic Violence Hotline, Women in Business Leadership Conference, and the Financial Fraud Prevention Alliance. They want you to tell your story, help other women recognize the signs of financial abuse and manipulation." I sat down slowly. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Making my trauma public entertainment. "It wouldn't be entertainment," our PR director said gently. "It would be education. Do you know how many women are in situations like you were? Controlled by partners who isolate them, manipulate them, steal from them. But they don't have the resources you had. They can't hire forensic accountants and private investigators. If you shared what happened to you and what signs to look for, you could potentially save someone else from going through what you did." I thought about those other women the investigators had found in Dominic's past, the ones who'd been too ashamed to report what happened. What if one of them had heard someone else's story and recognized the pattern earlier? "Let me think about it," I said, but I already knew what my answer would be, because staying silent, protecting my privacy, that was letting Dominic win in a way. He'd tried to make me small, ashamed, silenced. Speaking out would be the ultimate victory. 3 weeks later, I gave my first talk at the Women in Business Leadership Conference. Standing at that podium, looking out at 500 women in business, I told my story. Not the sensationalized version the media had covered, but the real one. How the manipulation had been gradual. How I doubted myself. How wealth and education hadn't protected me from being victimized because abuse doesn't discriminate. And I told them about fighting back. About trusting my instincts, about building a case, about being strategic and strong even when I felt broken inside. The standing ovation at the end made me cry. But they were good tears. Healing tears. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My boyfriend has been asking to be added to my bank accounts, saying it shows I trust him. But some of the things you described, I've been feeling them too. You just saved me from making a huge mistake." That's when I knew this was what I needed to do with this experience. Turn it into something meaningful. Over the next year, I spoke regularly about financial abuse and manipulation. I worked with legislators on laws to protect victims. I donated to organizations that help women escape abusive relationships. I turned my pain into purpose. Sterling Tech continued to thrive. I launched that cybersecurity division, which became one of our most profitable sectors. I hired more women to leadership positions. I created a company culture focused on integrity and respect, the opposite of what Dominic had represented. And slowly, carefully, I started dating again. Not seriously at first, just casual dinners with people Maya introduced me to, or colleagues who asked me out for coffee. I was cautious, hyper-aware of red flags, probably too suspicious, but I was also determined not to let what Dominic did make me afraid of connection forever. 2 years after the trial, I was named one of Forbes' 30 Under 30 in technology. The article focused not just on Sterling Tech's success under my leadership, but on my advocacy work and the ways I was using my platform to help others. The journalist asked me if I'd ever forgiven Dominic. I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I finally said. And I don't think I need to. Forgiveness isn't always necessary for healing. What I've done instead is accept what happened, learn from it, and build something better. I'm not the same person I was when I met him, and I'm grateful for that. The woman I am now is stronger, wiser, and more certain of her own worth. He tried to destroy me, and instead, he freed me to become the person I was always meant to be. On the 3rd anniversary of the night my father exposed Dominic, I drove out to the coast in my Porsche. I parked overlooking the ocean and sat on the hood, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The air smelled like salt and possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Dinner at 7. My cousin will be there again. You two really hit it off last time." I smiled. Maya's cousin Marcus was funny, kind, and had no idea who my family was when we first met, which had been refreshing. We'd been slowly building a friendship over the past few months, and maybe, possibly, it was starting to be something more. But I was taking it slow, protecting my heart, while also remaining open to the possibility of real love. I texted back, "I'll be there." As I drove back to the city, windows down, music playing, I thought about everything that had changed. I'd lost my marriage, my innocence, my ability to trust easily. But I'd gained so much more. My company, my purpose, my voice, my strength. Dominic had tried to take everything from me. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift, the knowledge that I could survive anything, that I was enough on my own, that I didn't need someone else to complete me or validate me. I was whole, all by myself, and that was the best revenge I could have ever asked for. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for staying with me through the darkest chapter of my life. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial abuse or manipulation in a relationship, please reach out for help. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you know. I'd love to hear from you. What city are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories of survival, strength, and fighting back. You never know when sharing our stories might help someone else recognize they're not alone.